Hello and welcome to The Week in 60 Minutes, brought to you by SpectatorTV and broadcast on Thursday, November the 3rd, 2022. My name is Freddy Gray. I am the Deputy Editor of The Spectator and I will be your host today. Coming up on the show, we're going to be talking about the migrant crisis, which is the big story of the week. I'll be joined by Patrick O'Flynn, who wrote this week's cover piece in The Spectator on the subject, and our very own data nerd, Michael Simmons. Next, we will move on to politics to talk about Rishi Sunak's first few days as Prime Minister with our politics team of James Forsyth and Katy. We will then cross the Atlantic to talk to Bridget Phetasy about the midterm elections, which are coming up on Tuesday night. After that, we will start to talk about Twitter, which has just been taken over by Elon Musk, and his plan to turn it into something similar to WeChat, which is the everything app in China. I'll be talking to Cindy Yu, our broadcast editor, about WeChat and what might happen to Twitter. And finally, we will talk to Stanley Johnson, a victim or survivor of the celebrity jungle, about Matt Hancock's interesting decision to throw himself into reality TV and appear on the show I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Why not subscribe to our YouTube channel? You can do that by clicking the red button at the bottom of your screen, and then after that click the subscribe button at the top of your screen to make sure you never miss an episode. Let's start with the migrant crisis, which is the big story of the week. There have been 40,000 new arrivals in Britain this year, which is an unprecedented high. It is the subject of our cover piece this week. At Sea, Can Sunak Navigate the Migrant Crisis? That piece was written by Patrick O'Flynn, who's sitting right here. And I'm joined also by Michael Simmons, who's our data expert. I called you a data nerd in the intros, but I'll change it. I'll change it. All right, you can still be a nerd. Patrick, I'll start with you. The Tory party has known that this is an issue that concerns voters. They have tried to address it for a very long time. They seem to have failed to address it for so long. What is it about the Tory party, do you think, that makes them incapable of addressing an issue that they know is important to their voters?
I think, to be fair to them, it's difficult. The responses that would work are liable to get a lot of blowback from the Liberal establishment, which, you know, they're keen to sort of keep one foot in, and from international bodies and from important other countries. So they have made the fundamental mistake they've made is to overpromise on the basis of policies which obviously won't work. So Boris Johnson, when he first became Prime Minister and this issue of the dinghies had just started, said, we will send you back. And that was an absolute rock-solid pledge from Boris, looking down the lens of a camera on national news. And it never happened. And then you also had Bridget Phetasy as a Home Secretary who constantly overclaimed and overpromised and underdelivered. I remember her at the October 2021 Tory conference saying triumphantly she was breaking the model of the people traffickers. Well, she obviously wasn't. Michael will confirm from the data that she wasn't. It was getting worse every year and has continued to get worse. The thing that could solve it, the sort of policies that could solve it, might involve coming out altogether from the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights. Will probably not, the Rwanda scheme, if it gets off the ground, won't be sufficient. We will need to have standard offshore processing from anyone who arrives illegally at a British overseas territory, something quite dramatic. And if this had been done 3 years ago, it could have been done at quite small scale and it would have nipped the problem in the bud. But now it's going to need a big facility to be built. And it's going to cause a lot of blowback. As I said, Sunak would be, for instance, accused of flouting terms of the EU withdrawal agreement in respect of the ECHR. Some people would say the same of the Good Friday Agreement. So they've got themselves into a position where it's become very difficult, but the salience of the issue among their key target groups of voters is huge. They're the 2019 Tories, the Leave voters that they need in order just to be competitive at the next election.
There was a sense, wasn't there, in the Johnson years that both Boris Johnson and Bridget Phetasy were quite willing to court the public row to get the negative headlines because that got voters on side, because voters actually quite like a government that's tough on the migrant crisis, but they weren't actually willing to address it. Do you think Rishi Sunak is more likely to address it while being slightly more nervous perhaps himself about the headlines?
I think Rishi Sunak's something of a mystery. He could be the proverbial wolf in sheep's clothing. He looks a very conventional prime minister from the sort of Blair Cameron type of image and approach. But I think he's intelligent enough to know that he's in a really tricky spot here. He doesn't have someone like Bridget Phetasy as his Home Secretary, who ultimately was wholly subservient to Boris Johnson. He has someone that I regard as, not the most articulate Home Secretary in Suella Braverman, but a bit of a political killer. She was a Brexit Spartan who effectively helped kill Theresa May. She's just done a deal with Rishi Sunak that killed Boris Johnson. And if he's not careful, she might kill him. She has enormous support on the Tory right and among Red Wall MPs, who actually turned out for her in the Commons on Monday in very large numbers. And I think she's already putting this Prime Minister under far more direct pressure to help her take the sort of steps that has a chance of succeeding than Priti Patel ever did to Boris Johnson.
Michael, give us some of the data. We get thrown a lot of figures about how bad things are getting. Give us some of the more salient figures that you've noticed.
So as Patrick mentioned, we're above 40,000 now in the small boat crossings, and that's kind of the big kind of headline grabbing figure. But what is kind of hidden is really the real strain that our asylum application system is under at the moment. So as it stands at the moment, there's about 127,000 asylum seekers and their dependents who are waiting for their applications to be processed. But what's really interesting about that figure is 10 years ago, that number was only about 15,000. But today, 15,000 are just Albanian nationals. And that equates to about roughly 1 in every 180 people in the Albanian population. If you restrict that just to men, it's more like 1 in 100. And obviously most of the people that are coming over from Albania are tending to be sort of young men. In terms of how long these applications are kind of taking to process as well, it's looking on average now at about 500 days. And of course, during this time, for most of it, the asylum seekers are not allowed to work. They're not even allowed to do voluntary stuff early on. So for all that time, there's literally hundreds of thousands of people are just in British towns and cities with nothing to do. At the same time, we've seen the amount in 6 months. It started at about 87% were processed within that time. Now it's nearer 6%. So that just shows the system has just almost completely collapsed. At the same time, though, the grant rate has kind of shot up. So now, if you are an asylum seeker, eventually you are more likely to have a successful application.
And the removals rate has gone down quite significantly, has it not?
Yeah, the removals rate has kind of really gone down through the floor. But that kind of started kind of over the last decade and kind of hasn't really been a recent thing. And that's kind of because there's been more and more success with legal challenges and appeals. And that's maybe not so much a recent problem, but it's something that's built up over time. And now that the kind of raw numbers of people coming is so big that that's kind of what's brought the system almost to a halt.
It's an odd paradox, isn't it, Patrick, that as the public conversation and indeed the political conversation has got much tougher about immigration, the system seems to be getting softer and softer.
Yes, and I think that's also true of legal migration routes where, under the radar, Boris Johnson, ran a very liberal regime, and I think the figure for last year was 1 million visas issued for long-term residents in the UK, the highest level ever. And then we also have Boris signing some pretty generous open-ended undertakings in respect, for instance, of Ukrainians, in respect of Hong Kong British national overseas passport holders. He announced a completely unilateral open-ended undertaking that Britain would take everybody. He didn't even get together with Canada, Australia, New Zealand and say, come on chaps, you've got more room than us. Can we put together an offer here, given the Chinese government's increasing oppression? So, this issue with the illegal arrivals cynically gaming the system, coming across on dinghies, is in that wider context where I think the anxiety about the approach to immigration overall is on a rising path again. There's a feeling that we have a housing stock which can't cope for the number of people already here. Our public services are under pressure, and that we haven't really got our integration strategy right. For instance, the recent unfortunate events in Leicester being an example of that. That, hang on, are we sure, with everyone who's come from all different parts of the world, that we've yet had enough time for people to get to know each other and work out, what's laudable diversity and celebrating heritage, and what's core common culture that everyone should sign up to. So I think the public's very anxious about that as well.
The Express on the front page are reporting about the government has, the Rwandan scheme is going to be actually extended or expanded to include other countries, Peru, Paraguay and Belize, I think, are the three, and another African country, as yet undisclosed. I mean, the Rwandan scheme hasn't really worked yet, has it? I don't think anyone can pretend that it has. But I suppose the thinking might maybe that Paraguay and Peru are not as politically sort of incendiary as Rwanda as a country to send migrants to.
Well, it is interesting, isn't it, that the government would increase the number of countries for a scheme that hasn't even worked in what would be the pilot scheme, right? That to me, relying on other countries to address your own, problems with illegal immigration, it always puts you at risk of the country's regime changing and them saying we don't want to do this anymore. And when Britain has its own overseas territories, a more secure path would be that we would take responsibility for our own issues and have basically a resilient approach that wouldn't collapse. But I suppose if we can bring other countries on scheme, that spreads the risk and spreads the load. I'm very sceptical, and I'm sure most voters will be, given that not a single migrant has gone to Rwanda, whether there's much point at this moment pressing ahead with other partner countries too.
What is the solution then? Because in your piece you suggest a new convention between European states, including Britain, on the treatment of migrants.
Well, I think that's worth exploring, because I think there's high anxiety among the conventional European governing political parties that they're getting outflanked, that public opinion is not happy. The result of Merkel's, everyone come. I think even she would recognise as a mistake and has caused all kinds of integration problems, social cohesion problems. And there are, populist right-wing parties making progress in many European countries now. So the appetite for a new approach that is not so open-ended is certainly there. But I personally see the solution for Britain is to create within its own domains and unilaterally a resilient programme like the Australians did 15 years ago, which would involve standard processing offshore in a British overseas territory and a general principle that no one who arrives illegally gets long-term residence in Britain, even if their asylum claim itself is validated. They would be then found another country, another safe country to be resettled in. And this was an approach that the think tank Policy Exchange recommended in a paper I would commend to people to have a look at earlier this year.
Do you think there's a case for a new, possibly bigger government department to deal specifically with this? Because there's a lot of resentment about the Home Office and a feeling that the Home Office just hasn't been able to deal with this issue. We stories today about migrants being left outside in their flip-flops for hours waiting for buses because the logistical facilities aren't there.
Yeah, there's certainly, and has been for years, a strong case to break the Home Office in two. So you would have a sort of law and order and policing department and an immigration and asylum department. That sounds like an organisational fix. And it seems to me that a lot of Home Office senior officials are not averse to undermining Home Secretaries who are trying to implement an agenda that the Home Office doesn't regard as, quote, Home Office policy, the classic Sir Humphrey thing. Now, whether it would actually work, I don't know. I mean, I don't think creating new departments is a panacea, but it would seem to offer more accountability on the issue of immigration and asylum if you had an important standalone Whitehall ministry with a Secretary of State specifically in charge of that area.
Michael, you mentioned Albanians. The Albanian government today has rebuked Britain for being rude about Albanians, saying they're all criminals and so on. Give us more on the actual data of that. I mean, a lot of them do seem to belong to criminal gangs and are smuggled into the country to carry out crime. Is there any hard, good data on that?
Well, this is kind of part of the problem, is that we're really in a sort of kind of blank, kind of dark space about knowing what actually asylum seekers are doing while they're here, because of the fact they're not allowed to work, but obviously we all know a lot of them do work. Because it's something that's officially not allowed to happen, it's not really kind of being monitored. So kind of the answer to your question is no, and that's kind of a huge part of the problem, that we don't know. In some cases we don't even know where in the country kind of people end up. But obviously if people leave official services and they're not in like the centres that are set up for them, then they're obviously doing something to make a living, and that some of that will be crime, others will be illegal employment where they are being exploited, because that's a way that people can pay people less than the minimum wage.
So in a way, the only data that you can pick them up on is through crime. It's registered crime.
Registered crime. Yep. And then it's kind of it's just speculation amounts who's kind of arrived.
I think it's worth saying here, by the way, that Theresa May's modern slavery legislation has become an example of the road to hell being paved with good intentions, because we've got now the absurd situation where many Albanian arrivals are putting forward the argument, I was brought here against my will, therefore you must let me stay, which is an odd idea, but are making use of the idea of being trafficked. And in some cases, particularly in cases of young women, I'm sure genuinely so. But why the just outcome to someone being brought to the United Kingdom against their will is to say you therefore stay in the United Kingdom, that seems to me rather illogical.
Theresa May was praised quite a lot for being such a long-serving Home Secretary in a job that often has had quite a high turnover. Her legacy doesn't look so good now, is what you're saying.
No, I think it's fair to say Theresa May's legacy doesn't look so good.
I think a lot of viewers will agree. Michael, Patrick, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now let's look at what's going on in Westminster this week. I am joined by our politics editors, James Forsyth and Katy Balls. James, let's start with you. We just had Patrick O'Flynn talking about his cover piece about the migrant crisis, and he suggested that Rishi Sunak could be a wolf in sheep's clothing, because he has a sort of nice, soft image that Liberal people on immigration tend to like, and yet he could be the Prime Minister that finally does get tough on this very, very emotive issue.
So I think small boats is turning into a kind of competence test for the government. I think that, when Sajid Javid came back from his Christmas holiday, remember, the numbers were relatively small. The numbers have now increased dramatically. More people crossed in a single day, one single day last week than crossed in the first 6 or 7 months of 2019 put together. And so I think the government now does have to come up with a solution to the problem, or at least a plan that says that they know how they intend to deal with this. And I think that is something that this is also kind of, I think previously you could say that the government were raising the salience of the small boats issue by talking tough about an issue and then not delivering on it. I think now the problem has become such that the government has no choice but to deliver on it, and tough rhetoric of the kind of type that Suella Braverman has been using. That alone is not going to cut the mustard. You are going to have to show that you are making progress on dealing with this, and particularly what is driving the current dramatic increase in numbers.
And is there, there's been a lot of talk about, will sort of Rishi Sunak turn on Suella Braverman? Are they singing from the same hymn sheet? Is she sort of embarrassing him, annoying him by manoeuvring like this on...
No, I think she is Home Secretary because there was a belief that you needed a cabinet that was kind of balanced across the Tory factions. And because, she is, serious about dealing with this issue. And I think that, they have to deal with this. The idea that you can say, we're going to have, it's for the birds. The government the government is committed on this course and now has to deliver on it.
Katy, moving on to other topics, Rishi Sunak U-turned. We had a first Rishi Sunak U-turn this week on COP. Why did that happen?
Yes, so I think this is the first proper U-turn since Rishi Sunak entered number 10. Some have said, it's actually number 7 or number 8, depending on how you count it. But I think the significance here is that Rishi Sunak, on entering number 10, Downing Street suggested that he would not be going to COP27 in Egypt, instead of be focusing on the autumn statement. And then this week, he said that he would be going after all, and that came after criticism, not just from the opposition, but from some on the Tory side. So Boris Johnson saying he would go, I'm sure didn't go unnoticed in number 10, but also the COP president, Alex Sharma, saying Rishi Sunak should go. And therefore, the question is this a gesture which shows Rishi Sunak is in listening mode and is willing to own up to mistakes or, change course if he thinks that's the right thing? Or does it just show that when faced with enough pressure, Rishi Sunak will switch direction? In which case, what does that mean for what's to come of, tricky stances in the autumn statement and so forth?
Do you think that the importance of Boris Johnson does that been slightly exaggerated by a press that's in the mood to make that comparison and say that these two men hate each other so much and they're in competition?
Yeah, I think we're so used at this point. I think we're so used to, at this point, Tory psychodrama that, people are looking in lots of ways. I think, though, Boris Johnson using the interviews guide to say that he had realised COP26 had become a bit unfashionable in parts of the party, does suggest there's still enough jibes going round about his successor and what Tory candidates said about his legacy on the environment. So I think on this U-turn, I think ultimately it's just too early to tell if this is significant. Is this a sign of Rishi Sunak's nature? Is it the fact that they came in, didn't expect to be in number 10 this quickly after the implosion of Liz Truss's government, and spent the first week almost flying blind with lots of things and made this quick decision and now changed course? I think ultimately there was an argument that with the autumn statement, you would have a situation whereby the decisions are going to be so unpalatable, having the Prime Minister flying to this event, in a fancy hotel, leaders could actually seem detached from reality. Well, let's see what they announce later this month and how it lands.
Well, James, another figure in this story who's featured quite prominently is King Charles, who seems to have, or certainly the palace has certainly been putting it about that he was not happy at being told by Liz Truss that he shouldn't attend COP, or being advised by Liz Truss he shouldn't attend, and that it felt like a bit of pressure was being applied on Sunak to change that policy, but actually it turns out it would have been too late anyway and King Charles wasn't going to go.
Yeah, there's an interesting story in Thursday's Times which says essentially that Rishi Sunak was not kind of inclined to kind of keep the bar on Prince Charles going that existed beforehand, but it just simply turned out to be too late to go for Charles to go in terms of the logistics. And King Charles is having this event at the Palace on Friday, which is a kind of road to COP event where John Kerry, who is, I think close to King Charles on these climate issues, and Rishi Sunak and Alex Sharma and all these various business leaders will be there. I think there is going to be a fascinating question about how King Charles does, the things that he did as Prince of Wales, that were his great causes. How does he carry on doing those as king? And then there is also, I think, a delicate question about how he balances the fact that he is not just king of the United Kingdom, of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, but also a whole bunch of other countries. I think one of the things that those who favoured King Charles going were saying was, hang on a second, some of these smaller Commonwealth countries are really on the front line when it comes to climate change, and they would like him there. So why is the British government saying that their head of state can't be there? So I think it is a reminder of some of the challenges that are coming up in terms of, because obviously with the Queen's death, in various places, you have reopened some of these debates about their constitutional arrangements, and I think it is going to require some very careful footwork from both the Palace and the UK government to handle these questions.
That will be very interesting to see. Let's move on to windfall tax. Every Labour idea becomes a Tory policy eventually. Is that fair of me to say that?
Well, I think briefly under Liz Truss, it seemed that might cease to be the case, but then, of course, that didn't end particularly well. So now we're back on the train, which is, look what Rachel Reeves and Ed Miliband are saying, and expected to come to a Tory government near you. But yes, this is, when it comes to the autumn statement, we know that the Treasury are very much, along with number 10, trying to lower expectations for this 50 billion fiscal black hole and say that's going to be tax rises for everyone, there's going to be spending cuts. And one aspect of this we expect to also be an increased or windfall tax when it comes to the energy companies. Now, Rishi Sunak brought this in when he was Chancellor. At the time, there are figures in Downing Street who really fought the original windfall tax, said it was unconservative. That was certainly Liz Truss's view too. But the view of those around Rishi Sunak was it polls really well. It is probably one of the most popular things you can do when it comes to revenue raises, and therefore is there an argument for going further this time around? It seems as though it's one of the options, one of the things they are likely to bring forward. I think the question is, Rishi Sunak's view has been that the way you get growth is through private investment. So with the original windfall tax, ultimately you could avoid much of the tax if you showed that you're investing in the long term, and therefore we're expecting this to be extended but also increased in terms of the percentage of the windfall tax. But how does this go alongside the growth incentives? Because if they're trying to bring in money to fill the fiscal black hole, actually what would you want for that to be achieved is people actually just paying straight up. And therefore I think in terms of landing this, the other question is, how does the right of the party respond to this? Because they didn't like the first one. Are they going to like a revamp? Probably not. But I think the big test of this autumn statement is effectively a situation whereby various parts of the party are going to have to swallow things they don't like. And the question is, in terms of Tory unity, we have an uneasy truce at the moment where I think everyone has decided to behave at least for a few weeks. If you do have things such, foreign aid not being increased in the way some want it, being delayed. If you have defence spending actually not going up in the way that some campaign for, as Ben Wallace has said he wants, and if you have a windfall tax and also personal tax rises, do MPs throw their toys out the pram, or actually do people say this is what we need for difficult times? Because I think as soon as one faction starts to say, I don't like this, that's when discipline will probably break down across the whole party.
James, it's not a windfall tax in name only. It's not just a headline-grabbing thing that actually won't raise that much revenue, but it gets the right headlines on side, it gets the right story across for the Prime Minister.
I think it raises some money. I think there is an intellectual justification for it, which is that these extraordinary profits have not been triggered by any great innovation in the energy sector. They are essentially wartime profits because of what Putin's invasion of Ukraine has done to global energy prices. I think there is also a big question about how the original windfall tax basically set a level at which if energy prices remained above that level, the windfall tax would apply. I mean, there is an intriguing question as to how long we expect energy prices to remain elevated. We know that the Treasury think they will remain elevated in historical terms for the rest of this decade. Will they put in a line, as they did in the original windfall tax, saying that if energy prices drop back below this historic level, then the windfall tax will cease? I mean, that is along with the investment incentives, that is a thing to watch. And then I think the other thing to watch is, how does this extend to electricity generators of renewables? They are also getting a huge bump in how much they're paying. Now, not all of them are, because some of them are on these things will contract for difference, which essentially sets a price, which means they can't be paid more than that price. But how do you handle that question? And then there is a whole bigger argument that we've discussed in the past on, what is your energy security mix? What do you think gives you greater protection against the kind of price movements that we've seen in this year following the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Speaking of that, you did touch on this, Katy, but Ben Wallace, it seems to be in negotiation at the moment over possible spending cuts to defence. What's going to happen there?
Well, I think you can see Ben Wallace almost softening a little bit in some of his public statements on this. Now, this all relates to a pledge that Rishi Sunak did not make. It's a Liz Truss pledge when it came to increasing defence spending to 3% of GDP by 2030. And you have a situation whereby Ben Wallace and James Heappey, Defence Minister under Liz Truss, went out on the airwaves during her brief premiership and said he would resign if this did not go up in the way he expected it to. Now, I think it's significant that Rishi Sunak has not put his name to this, but also when there was some discussion about his cabinet, Ben Wallace, or at least a journalist, let it be known that Ben Wallace was no longer of the view that he would quit the cabinet or not be able to serve in it. Did this not meet the exact timeline he wanted? So I think the question, so it does feel as though defence is one area where it's not so much new cuts, but potentially the speed of investment compared to expectations just a few weeks ago could be in two different places. But I think if you look at some of Ben Wallace's comments earlier this week, it feels at least there is a landing space. And again, you look at that reshuffle, Ben Wallace, Andrew Mitchell, who led the Foreign Aid Rebellion, now in the Foreign Office. You have Rob Halfon, who's now an education minister. There could be cuts to education. I think there is an effort. Hugh Merriman, former chair of the Transport Select Committee, who's been very critical of some of the government's plans. They effectively have brought lots of potential rebels. If you ask me to write a list of the people who would rebel about various issues, a lot of them are now actually in the government. So therefore, does it work to the point that they will front these changes in difficult times and bring the MPs on side, or does it all go wrong and you get quite a few resignations?
So more psychodramas before Christmas, you think?
Well, I think there's a potential for it. I think the test is, if you can get through this autumn statement without any resignations and just a few grumbles on the backbenches, I think that is the clearest sign yet that the Tory party does want to govern and actually can put psychodrama behind it. I think if it all starts to implode after that, I think people will conclude this is an ungovernable party.
Very interesting indeed. Thank you very much, James and Katy. Next week, America will go to the polls for the midterm elections, and the Republicans, if the polls are correct, seem to be gaining quite a lot of ground. I'm joined now by Bridget Phetasy, who is a columnist for Spectator World and a brilliant podcaster and YouTuber and all such stuff. Bridget, you think there's going to be a red wave for the Republicans, do you not?
I think so. I think it seems that way. That definitely seems to be the temperature. It's, I think it's hard with polls because who will pick up the phone to be polled and who will actually take a poll and who's lying. But the temperature seems to be people are mad. They see it as kind of a retribution for the pandemic policies or mandates in many cases. And this is their way to extract that vengeance.
You think the pandemic is as big a factor as the economy?
I think the economy is a big one too. I mean, I think that's a huge piece, is that people are worried about the economy. Things haven't been great. The shelves have been barren. That gas has been really high. And then you have this residual resentment that still seems to exist that actually I think was really stoked by the Atlantic piece about having a pandemic amnesty. It seemed to have the opposite effect, where it reminded people of all of the rage that they still have for things that happened during the pandemic.
I saw that. Just for our British listeners who may not have seen that, that was a piece in the Atlantic saying we need to have an amnesty about COVID and forgive each other for all the fights and arguments we had. And the reaction on social media was enormous, and it was to the effect of hell no, I think was a fair summary of what it was.
Yeah, I think you have to have accountability before you are asking for forgiveness. You have to admit that things went wrong, and I don't think that that's really the case in this instance. I don't think anybody said, "Oh, maybe we didn't do a lot of these things right. We were doing the best we could. Even after we had more information, we could have made some changes earlier that might have given people relief." And people are mad. People died alone. Kids lost years of their lives. And I think that people are rightfully still angry about a lot of the things they felt they had no control over, like being forced into getting a vaccine or keeping their job when there wasn't very much scientific evidence to back that up. So there's definitely a palpable anger. And in blue states in particular, I'm in California, it seems like the moms are mad.
Well, I saw a piece today suggesting that suburban mothers are breaking towards Republicans quite heavily in the days leading up to. What do you think that is? And is our actual sort of natural Democrats seem to be embracing the idea of voting Republican? Is that not going on?
There does seem to be that for the first time. I mean, you can't, I know they want to try and downplay crime, you know, that they being the media or people saying, oh, this is just people being hysterical. But I have eyes. People know what they see with their own eyes. And I live in a blue city that has progressively become more dangerous. There's more mental illness on every single corner. There's more encampments everywhere I turn. That's not something I'm just imagining. That's something I'm seeing in real time. And I don't think I'm alone. And I think that in blue states in particular, the kids were locked down and out of school for some of the longest periods of time. Now we're seeing the learning delays, a lot of the social delays, and this affects people. I would say the lower class is more affected by this as well. A lot of the people that we claim, you know, the liberal claim to care about, they suffered the greatest. People are poorer. People are not as healthy. They're sicker. And so I don't think it's weird that people are looking around and saying, I don't know what to do, but I know whatever I've been doing is not working. So just voting for the opposite party seems like the move.
We should clarify that you yourself, you're not partisan, you are politically homeless, as you called yourself in a brilliant Spectator article. I mean, do you think a lot of Americans are like you? They are without a political tribe, but they're extremely fed up, frustrated, and actually just sort of weirded out by the parties that represent them.
I do. I think it's tough. You want to. There doesn't seem to be a principled party, although they might both claim to have the kind of moral high ground. And I think that being kind of in the wasteland of the center, as I call it, I definitely am taking things more like piecemeal. You know, it's more instance by instance, and I would say that in California, it's just a one-party state. So I'll vote just red just for some kind of balance, for any kind of balance. There's no balance in California at all. So I'm in a different circumstance, and for instance, somewhere in a purple state where my vote might actually matter. In California, it doesn't really matter, but I do think we're seeing such close races in places where it shouldn't be close. Like in New York City and Oregon, they might have a governor for the first time in 40 years who's Republican. Oregon. Anyone who knows anything about Oregon, this is like the most blue hippie state, but you've seen the videos of what's gone on in Portland over the years, and people, when people are worried about their safety, I think historically they just vote red. I'm not a policy expert or political expert, but I believe that's usually the trend.
A lot of Democrats were quite excited over the summer because they thought they were getting a lot of momentum after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Do you think they exaggerated how much that meant to the American public, or did that energy fade, or is it now fading?
Yeah, that was interesting. I think they did get some momentum, but I feel like when they poll people, it's like 7th on the list of things that they are concerned about. I don't actually think it's very high on the list when you're faced with inflation. And again, this is a thing that people want to downplay, but when you're somebody who counts, pennies and is working within a budget, you know that your money isn't going as far. You know that grocery bill that you get every single week it's costing you more money. You know that the gas for the commute you do is costing you more. This isn't something you're just imagining. And it's even more offensive when people are telling you, oh, you're just being crazy. inflation isn't really that bad and the prices aren't going up and your dollar isn't worth as much and everything is going up. So people are really feeling that. And that's, I'm sorry, but crime and what things are costing, these are, they affect people very personally, instantly and personally. It's not like that thing, this theory over there.
One thing that strikes me looking at it as a foreigner, looking at these elections, is how odd some of the Senate candidates are. You have John Fetterman, who had a stroke, and obviously that's very horrible for him, but it's just quite odd to watch him carry on, even though he clearly can't talk properly, campaigning, and sort of nobody really admitting within his camp that things aren't right. Then you have Herschel Walker, who's a sort of extraordinary character, very charismatic, but with an extremely colourful past. You have Carrie Lake running for governor as well, who's quite a telegenic and loud character. What's going on? It feels like wacky races to me.
Yeah, they are wacky, and I don't think that people are very happy about the options. The average person doesn't seem too excited. It's hard because you feel, I feel like this is the best we can do. There's, hundreds of millions of people in this country, and these are the people that we're putting up to lead. And unfortunately, I don't think that the kind of people who want to get into politics are the people who should be getting into politics, and the people who should be have no interest in getting into politics. And with Fetterman, it feels almost, again, it almost feels like a slap in the face. Like you're just, we know you're going to vote blue no matter who we put up there. And it feels, it's like a weird sort of entitlement that the party has, both parties have. But in this instance, it seems like we know you're going to vote for this person, even though they just had a stroke and have a hard time talking. And then if you note that, you're somehow an ableist, or you're somebody who doesn't care about the disabled.
It also feels like politics, people have said they're fed up with politics as usual, and so the American political system has given people just very abnormal politicians. And that's not necessarily what people wanted, is it?
No and yes. I guess we get the leaders we deserve. Isn't that the expression? I know that people wanted the change, the wrecking ball that was Trump. People liked that. He came in and he exposed a lot of, everything on all sides for everything that it is. And now with Biden, I don't know if it was like this sense of returning back to some normal, but it hasn't been normal at all. It's been strange and unsettling in a different kind of way. And then you have, like you said, Herschel Walker and all these people that it feels like people are having to put aside their principles because the culture war is so much more important than whatever your principles might be. So, okay, even if you're pro-life and you find out that he paid for an abortion, Herschel Walker, you're still going to vote for that person because having control of the Senate is more important than whatever your personal principles might be in regards to that person who's running. And when you're doing that, it's like, of course you're going to get candidates who are weird if people are just saying, my own principles be damned. It's all about power. And in some respects, it is.
You sometimes in your writing and in your broadcast, you sound in a sort of state of despair about America. Is that getting worse over these midterms, or are you actually beginning to find a bit of hope?
I'm in despair for different reasons. I'm more concerned with everyone's mental health. and the addiction and the deaths of despair and the trickle down effect of a lot of all of this insanity. You know, just how divided we are, just everybody spending too much time online, the lack of grace and compassion that we have for one another. We had Paul Pelosi get attacked. There's conspiracy theories everywhere. People don't trust anything, and I understand why. And then you have people laughing about it, but people on both sides do this when there's political violence or sweep it under the rug. And that seems to be the self-fulfilling prophecy that keeps on escalating. And I'm not sure where the bottom is to that. You know, it feels like, even in California, it feels like California needs to hit rock bottom before it can kind of start recovering. But America feels that way too, although parts of it seem like they're more behind other places where it feels just a bit out of control.
Well, there are still great Americans like you, Bridget. So thank you very much for coming on to Spectator.
Thank you.
Elon Musk, the billionaire, has bought Twitter, you may have noticed, and there's been a lot of complaining and worrying about what he might do to the app. But he has made his intentions quite clear. He said he wants it to be an everything app. And the model, the inspiration for it, it seems, is the Chinese app WeChat, which Cindy Yu, our broadcast editor, is here to explain to us a bit about. WeChat in China, Cindy, is a kind of everything app. You can do everything through it. Is that right? Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like, how it works?
Yeah, so WeChat really is an everything app. So it started as a simple messaging platform, so you might imagine WhatsApp or something like that. But since then it added this wallet functions, WeChat Pay. So you might think of your Apple Pay on your phone. Imagine that's added to your WhatsApp app. So which means that you can send money to your family and friends, but also you can pay for services. So if you have an integrated Deliveroo, food ordering app on WeChat, which you do, you can pay through that. So you can do everything from food ordering to ordering taxis to making doctor's appointments, buying train tickets, anything and everything you can think of, as long as the service is out there to do it. That business can launch themselves onto WeChat because WeChat allows you to build these kind of sub-software.
So what's the Chinese equivalent of Uber then?
So there's one called Didi Chuxing, which is,
and that's on WeChat?
Yeah, and you can have like an interface on WeChat for that. You can also use Didi's own app, but what WeChat does is that because everything is integrated all together, they're making it so that you never have to leave. And obviously some people still use multiple apps, and many people do that. But it's about the ease of the thing. It's about how convenient it is to never have to leave this one app. And they are really dominating the market with that.
And it uses the currency as yen. It uses,
yes.
There's no coin that you use on WeChat.
No, there's no crypto involved.
Because there's been a
like
lot of speculation about Musk that he's going. Dogecoin has rallied massively in the last few days because people think he might use Doge as a payment system on Twitter.
But no, part of the problem is that WeChat has to very much follow Chinese laws, and cryptocurrencies are banned in China.
They're not fans of it, are they?
No, they're not fans of it. China's trying to roll out its own digital currency, and WeChat is trying to integrate that as well. But no, the currency is renminbi. So you link it to your Chinese bank card, you add money into it, or you get money from your family and friends, and then you can basically use it as a bank card.
Okay, and the owner of WeChat is Pang Ma?
Pony Ma. I don't think it's his given name. I think he chose it, but yeah.
Pony Ma, no relation of Jack Ma.
No relation to Jack Ma, but both of them are at the leading cutting edge of basically Chinese Silicon Valley.
But Jack Ma has fallen foul of the People's Republic, whereas Pony is still in favour.
Well, I wouldn't say in favour. Big tech as a whole has fallen foul of Chinese government over the last few years. Various kind of antitrust regulations, fines, running up to kind of billions of dollars we're talking about, have really kind of taken these companies down a peg. They're losing talent, they're losing people that they were hiring at a really fast pace before. Jack Ma was a special case because he was just so out there. You know, he was so... He's such a tall poppy with the things that he would do. You know, he would do these concerts for his employees dressed up like Michael Jackson. He would commentate on what he thinks Chinese politics is like. You know, you don't you don't do that kind of stuff if you want to succeed in China.
Too much public personality for the CCP.
Exactly, and Pony takes a much lower profile with that, but even he has, his company is Tencent, runs video games, so people might know them from League of Legends. They're the company behind that. They've been taken down a peg by government regulation against video games. Then WeChat's the other big arm of his company, and that so far is okay.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Tencent obviously are subordinate to the Chinese Communist Party, and they have to obey when they're told to do things. But in a more liberal society like America, if Twitter does turn into an everything app and has the kind of power that WeChat has, it can't really be answerable to the government. I mean, it could be. People talk about big tech becoming more powerful than the government. WeChat in a free society could be even more powerful than it already is.
I think that's true. And also I think big tech in the West has already signaled to governments that they want to cooperate, right? With the online safety bill, Twitter and YouTube are saying to governments, leave it to us, we'll self-regulate, all of this kind of stuff. And I think it really depends on what the government does with that. Is this legal but harmful clause, is that going to be kept in there? Which would give a lot of these tech companies the right to arbitrate what can and can't be said. But even leaving that aside, they have a lot of data. They do have a lot of data. But I think being in a free society, it would be much harder to create a WeChat equivalent because there's just so much competition. WeChat developed in a country behind the Great Firewall. There was no Facebook, there was no WhatsApp, there was no YouTube. And so there was very little external competition. Obviously, the Chinese social media apps scrap between each other like anything, but that obviously does help. So I think Elon Musk will have a tough job on his hands to really try to incorporate all of that into one, because I can't see why if you're Deliveroo you would let him get away with that, or if you're Uber or any of these other apps, why you would want to lose your own market stake.
Finally, you've written a very interesting piece about this in this week's Spectator, and you talk about these red envelopes. So when you send money on WeChat, it arrives in a red envelope.
Yes,
and this is a
digital red envelope.
This is a Chinese custom, giving people money, stuffing money in red envelopes and giving it to them. That's a custom going back to when?
Thousands of years.
Yeah. And you remember it from your childhood?
Yeah, I do. And it's a lovely thing to do. It's a bit like how your parents might fill your stocking over Christmas Eve. Parents fill their kids' red envelopes, put it under their pillows over Chinese New Year Eve, because the idea is that it wards off evil, and it wards off, the children's story goes, it wards off a monster which comes and grabs kids and it's scared of the red. And I love that. I love that part of Chinese culture. But I've not received those in years, not because I've grown up, but because
Have you received a red wallet on WeChat?
Yes, all the time. Yeah, all the time, yeah. It's great because being overseas, for the first few years I was here, I was really losing out on a lot of money because my family in China couldn't give me any physical money. Yeah. So I'm now getting that money, but at the same time, the romance of the thing, the tradition of the thing, cash itself is obsolete in China, in a lot of urban China at least.
Yes. Well, do Chinese people regret that? Because what limited freedom they have in China is partly enabled by cash, and a cashless society is a less free society, do you not think?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why the government wants to create this digital currency to go alongside proper cash, so that they basically can see everyone's transactions if they wanted to. I think there's a lot of data that you give away through using this free app, that because social media came in such a storm in China and everyone kind of wanted to get onto it and it became such a popular thing to get on, I write in my piece that it would be possible to live without WeChat, but it would be a very difficult Luddite life. Because that happened, I think a lot of people basically gave away this data without really thinking about it. So I think we are more privacy conscious here, whereas I don't think cash is going to go as easily here. But we see it coming here as well, where you choose convenience over tradition or over
freedom.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, Freddie, do you use cash? I mean, I never use cash anymore.
I try to keep using cash, but it's getting harder.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay, well, good for you. Yeah. But I think it is getting harder. So, in WeChat, in China, because it's so easy, even in the informal economy, if you're buying fruit on the street side, they will have a WeChat code for you to scan. If that kind of area is not something you can use cash in, there is really very few contexts for it anymore.
Well, I think we'll end it there, but I hope you get a red envelope stuffed with Dogecoins at some point in the future. Probably not very soon, but at some point. Thank you very much, Cindy.
Thank you.
Well, this week, Matt Hancock revealed that he is going into the celebrity jungle for I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. He said that he wants to get in touch or to show his human side, as if we haven't seen enough of that already. I'm joined here at The Spectator by Stanley Johnson, who has been in the celebrity jungle in 2017. Do you think it's a wise move for Matt Hancock?
Well, I will say I have been there, and this is the first time people have been going back to that jungle. I don't want to give away any trade secrets, but it's somewhere in Australia, and they haven't been back there since 2017. So this is, a historic return. Yes, I think he is wise. I think it's absolutely fine. He's going to have an amazing time himself, and I think his message, and he's been making it clear what his message is, it's to speak up for dyslexics and dyslexia and the battle against dyslexia, will be heard loud and clear. And Mac, you could say that so much fuss has already been generated that in a sense he's achieved his objective even before he's arrived in the jungle.
Well, I could see that case. He's had the whip removed. Do you think that's unfair?
Well, just speaking totally personally, I'm absolutely delighted that Matt Hancock has had the whip removed, because I'm fighting very, very hard at the moment a bitter political battle to try and stop the government proceeding with a bill, I'm calling it the Rees-Mogg bill, which will effectively scrap 170 environmental regulations and desperately undermine our position. So one vote less for the government, even if that vote is Matt Hancock, is good news to my ear. So I'm absolutely happy about it.
Do you think that might be, we're getting away from I'm a Celebrity here briefly, but do you think that might be why Rishi Sunak U-turned on going to the COP summit, because he knows he's got this bill coming up?
Well, I think it's a very, very good point. I think he's going to have to make some huge gesture in Sharm el-Sheikh that this bill was a mistake. It's a legacy bill, if you like. It's a legacy from the Trust administration, and it can be stopped. The trouble is it went through on Rishi Sunak's very first day, the second reading. It can be stopped. It needs to be stopped. And I think if he makes some signal in that direction, and of course it's not just COP27, it's all the international networks we're in. In fact, there's another COP coming up, which is the Biodiversity COP, which is in Montreal in December. So yes, he has a good record to pronounce on in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is, in a sense, our commitment to climate change goals, our commitment to the nature protection goal, which is now in the Environment Act. But by Jove, he has to show that he has taken on board the message which has been delivered so severely over the last few weeks that the Tories are waging a war on nature.
Scurrilous journalists are suggesting that the only reason Rishi Sunak is going is because your son Boris Johnson is going to the...
Well, this is where I think I use the Urquhart reply. Yeah. They may say that. I can't possibly comment.
Well, in any case, we should probably get back to the jungle, which is meant to be the point of this conversation. Is it as awful as it looks? Is it hellish being there? Did you enjoy it at all?
I didn't think it was hellish at all. And just reverting for a second to my dyslexia thought, for me it was absolutely wonderful that you couldn't write, you couldn't read. They didn't have the materials, apart from anything else, for writing or reading. You had to talk. Well, thinking about dyslexia, I can imagine this in many ways is an ideal situation for Matt Hancock. Says he's had a history of dyslexia. Well, he should be in his comfort zone there. I found myself in my comfort zone, I can tell you. I really did, partly because the people I was with were so fantastic. There was a wonderful lady called Becky Vardy. You may have been reading about her in the context of something called Wagatha.
She's been in the news. Yeah.
Could not have been nice. I did a trial with Amir Khan, world welterweight boxing champion. Couldn't believe when I was elected by 9 million votes of the voters to be the Prime Minister of number 10 Downing Creek. Toff, who was about 17 years old then, she must be a bit older now, was elected Vice President. No, sorry. Yes, Vice
Prime Minister.
Vice Prime Minister. And Amir Khan was shocked and horrified. He said, but if Stanley has to step aside, we'd have a woman Prime Minister. So we had to say to him, actually, Amir, we have had Margaret Thatcher. I don't think we'd had Mrs. May by that point, but we definitely had Margaret Thatcher.
I mean, Matt Hancock obviously had a rather sort of public disgrace as Health Secretary. Do you think the jungle offers people a chance to redeem themselves?
This is
in the public
interesting.
eye?
Good heavens. The jungle as redemption. wow. Well, of course, there's a good lot of Catholic, what's the word I'm looking for, theology on this, isn't there?
Yeah.
They used to go around hitting themselves, and wasn't there a whole sect of people who were the flagellators, they were called?
Yeah, Opus Dei, I think. Yeah.
That was probably it too.
Yeah.
Yes, this is very interesting. I hadn't thought of that in terms of its kind of sacramental effect. I don't think the public would pretty much buy into that. I don't think they'll say, just eating kangaroo testicles or whatever is a penance in that sort of sense. No, I think that basically he would have to earn his redemption, if he has to earn his redemption, by being a jolly good performer, by doing the Bush-Tucker trials, and by being right up there in the front. And I think you'll find that his constituents at that point will really come over him in a big way. Since when did the people of West Suffolk have a winner of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here?
But so the celebrities are asked to do these grisly trials, and that's nominated by the public, isn't it? So presumably Hancock, with his, he's going to be nominated.
He is going to be in the firing line. That is for sure. I can guarantee the first vote for the public, which the public has, they are bound to say, well, this one's for Matt, whether it's going up, being hoisted up into the jungle tree with 45 snakes, or whether it's eating some ghastly something or other, or whether it's swimming underwater and unlocking various locks in order while your oxygen is running out.
Yeah.
No, you don't have oxygen. You're having to hold your breath.
Oh, God. Well, the British public love torturing people and then forgiving them, so maybe it will.
Well,
work.
maybe. It's an interesting thought. It should be pursued. I would have thought an article in The Spectator on reality TV as a means of redemption would do well.
Sacrament of reality
yes.
TV. Well, yes, I think actually one last question. I'm sorry to ask you about your son again, but he recently nearly returned to the other jungle of SW1 and Westminster. Are you relieved on a paternal level that your son will not be Prime Minister again?
No, I'm not going to go down that route particularly because I have learned that there's no point trying to look ahead. Nobody knows what is going to happen. I am constantly surprised. I will say it's made my life a little bit easier, for example, at this very, very moment when I am fiercely opposed to what appears to be a proposal by the government, in the sense that the government has laid the bill before Parliament. It makes my life a little bit easier to have a conversation like this with you, knowing that Boris is not the man in the, in the firing line.
Stanley Johnson, thank you very much for coming in.
Great pleasure.
Don't forget to subscribe to The Spectator, our YouTube channel, that is. Do that by clicking the red button at the bottom of the screen and the bell icon at the top to get a reminder so that you never, ever miss an episode. Thank you very much. See you again soon.